Toss aside the touchy-feely notions of love in business and recognize the real power it holds. Welcome to the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast with host Steve Farber. Drawing on his work with a wide variety of companies from the Fortune 100 to smaller family-owned businesses, Farber shares inspiring interviews with business leaders and proven strategies for how you can create experiences that your customers will love by developing a culture that your employees, teammates, and colleagues love working in. Discover why and how love, at the end of the day, is just damn good business for you too. Here's your host, Steve Farber.
All those little things that come up that say you are worthless, you are valueless, you are too small, people are going to find out you're a fraud. Those are the things that are in what I called the soul track. And that's where I had to work with people, and I could teach them the strategy, but we always ended up looking at the obstacles and the blocks in what I called that soul track. And so the soul sourced idea is that those are the things that are really being called to grow, to expand. You're being called to break out of it. And those are also the things that lead you to what I think is a more aligned direction and on a better path than just typical left brain, grab it out of thin air and say, here's my purpose. And it's a more organic way of being, but it happens to really be true and really resonate with my ideal client.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast. I'm your host, Steve Farber, but I assume you already knew that. Just so you know, it's not a coincidence that the title of this podcast, Love is Just Damn Good Business, also happens to be the title of my most recent book, Love is Just Damn Good Business, in case you didn't know that either. So check it out if you haven't as of yet. And if you'd like to read the transcript of this podcast, this conversation that you're about to hear, or if you'd like to watch it, or if you'd like to listen to it, or if you'd like to do all of the above, just go to stevefarber.com/podcast. And I suspect that you're going to want to do that with our guest today, who is the one and only Christine Kane. Now, I met Christine a while back. I don't know what year was that we met, Christine?
It was like 1931.
1930. I was thinking it was in the late 20s, but okay. It was a while ago. We met at a business conference, and which is not all that unusual for me because, I spend a lot of time at business conferences, but given that Christine Kane at the time was a full-time singer, songwriter, musician who was at a business conference, that was a little bit different. And there's good reason for it. So Christine, in her background as a very talented, beautiful singer-songwriter, she built really quite an impressive career, toured around the world 200 days a year, shared the stage with people like folks like John Mayer, you may have heard of him, the Beach Boys, you may have heard of them, Los Lobos, Nancy Griffith, and Sean Colvin. Really, she carved out a great career for herself as a musician, and in the process learned that she is, at her core, an entrepreneur. And over time has really evolved into helping entrepreneurs who see themselves as being creative, see themselves as being sensitive, who see themselves as being something other than the stereotypical entrepreneur. Christine helps them to see that those things are actually an advantage. And she is the author of this new book, The Soul-Sourced Entrepreneur. And Christine, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the podcast.
It's really a huge pleasure to be here.
So let's start with I want to hear your story. So I've got the typical kind of bio from your publisher, I think. Mm-hmm. I've also poked around on your website, of course, and I see the way you tell your personal story on your website. There is no resume, CV, bio, and that kind of language on your site. It's the story in your own voice. And Can you just tell us where this soul-sourced entrepreneur idea first began? Not as a book, not as a marketing thing, but the core and the essence of it. Where did that begin for you?
Wow, that's a great question. So I was touring. I was playing music, performing, making CDs, DVDs, all the stuff. And I was also hosting retreats for fans of mine who kept asking me, how do I do what you're doing? How do I start a business? How do I live my passion? And how do I do it in a way that feels authentic and real and not be terrified? And as I started teaching people and doing that work, I had to mine for my own process. Like, how did I do this? How did I set this up? And where did I hit a wall and have to change directions? And as I taught business and as I worked with entrepreneurs over the years, I started to realize there were two tracks in every business. I didn't talk about this, but I started to realize we had all the strategy, which was everything people associated with business, which was, how to sell, how to hire team, how to set up systems, all these little things that we call strategy. But where most people I found were getting caught was in something I started calling the soul track. So there's this strategy track, there's this soul track. And that is the mindset. That is the playing small. That's I worked in corporate and I was, national sales director. I was regional sales director. I was so good, but I can't sell me. And all those little things that come up that say you are worthless, you are valueless, you are too small, people are going to find out you're a fraud. Those are the things that are in what I called the soul track. And that's where I had to work with people, and I could teach them the strategy, but we always ended up looking at the obstacles and the blocks in what I called that soul track. And so the soul sourced idea is that those are the things that are really being called to grow, to expand. You're being called to break out of it. And those are also the things that lead you to what I think is a more aligned direction and on a better path than just typical left brain, grab it out of thin air and say, here's my purpose. And it's it's a more organic way of being, but it happens to really be true and really resonate with my ideal client for sure.
So when you started out as a musician, when was that for you? When did you decide I'm gonna be a singer-songwriter?
I was working in a cubicle at Ogilvy and Mather. I had been in PR for 1 year out of college, and I was so miserable I could barely contain myself. I couldn't believe this is what people settled on doing. And I never really shared anybody that I had this dream. And I honestly I don't even think I was brave enough to say it out loud to anyone. And I started writing letters to God in my journal that I was miserable in my job, that I was grateful I had one, but I was miserable and I really wanted to be a songwriter. And I didn't tell a soul in my life. And I just started, we were talking about guitars before the podcast happened. I bought my first guitar. I started taking lessons, and eventually I quit my job, and then I moved to a different city and just started taking steps, terrified the whole time, but at least not depressed anymore.
So you had a glimpse of the business corporate world, mm-hmm. and then you dove headlong, in spite of your fear or terror, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. into the music world. When you started when you laid down that gauntlet for yourself that said, I'm going to be a singer-songwriter, or whatever terminology you used, did it ever occur to you back in that early time that there was going to be a business element to this as well?
Hell no.
So it was purely a creative, I'm an artist, man.
No, I was so broken. And so I was such I was the worst of the worst at first. I just wanted to be rescued. I just wanted to be discovered. I kind of thought that I would get a record deal and then just it would all be done and everyone would recognize, oh, this is so wonderful. And when that didn't happen, I guess I was about 2 years into it, and I started to get slapped around enough that it woke me up out of just sort of that really disempowered place, to use an overly used word. And I started to, as I was on the road doing trips, I started to listen to business books and realized, oh, if I want to keep doing this, like really, I don't want to go back to being in a cubicle. I'm going to have to get serious about myself as a business. And I don't know if I actually articulated it that way. At first, I went through a lot of like, wah. I don't, that disillusioning thing of just like,
I start my day like that every day.
Yeah, I had that little tantrum. Like, I thought it was going to be easier than this. And yet I will say that little moment of disillusionment, it wasn't writing songs and playing music. All of that was a great thing in and of itself. I loved learning that. I loved art. I love music. And when I had to start shaping up, and it's sort of like that strategy and soul thing, when I had to start shaping up and really shaping the strategy path and get my little mindset into gear, everything changed. I started to realize, oh, I have to start being the one to give myself permission. I have to be the one to discover myself. I have to be the one to be able to put myself out there. And that turned a lot around for me, and it gave me a great deal of respect for entrepreneurship and business ownership and understanding how all of this stuff works.
So what I'm hearing there is the realization that I need to bring in a business element to my music career is the shift from waiting for something to happen to you, the shift from that to I can take control of this to a large degree. And a lot of artists never get to that part. It's just kind of I'm going to do my art and the world will discover me kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens.
Yeah. I have a podcast too called Soul Sourced Business Podcast, and I did a whole episode on waiting. And it's called Procrastination and the 8 Waits. And it's the things people wait for before they actually step into that driver's seat.
When I look at your work, Christine, I see the creative songwriter in the way that you present to the world.
Yeah.
Like to say the title of that podcast again?
Procrastination and the 8 Waits.
I mean, that's what a
I know it's such a burden though, because if when you and I were at SobCon at that conference, the whole thing was about how to write good headlines, and I know how to write a good headline, but they bore me because otherwise I'd be saying 5 ways to break out of procrastination and always have great priorities. I can't do it. But
that's
you.
A good thing. It sounds like you're apologizing.
I'm not very searchable is the problem. I mean, it's just like people find me because of the same, like very organically. And it's nice and it's great, but
people find you for the right reasons. By the way, I just have to say this out loud. You said earlier, I was the worst of the worst at first, which is a great line for a song. Also,
it is just
for the record. So people find you. They do find you organically. They find you because what you're offering to folks. There's a great. People are walking around with that need to fill. It's this. Well, I'll give you an example. So here, for people who are watching this on video, they'll see that. Let's see this. Do you recognize?
You have the Uplevel, yeah.
So this, what I'm holding up is the Uplevel My Life Journal. Daily and weekly practices for activating your personal power. Now, why do I have this? I'll tell you why I have this, because I know you wanted to ask. So I'll ask it myself. Because, this is my wife's. This is my wife, Veronica. Bought this course. And did, I've got, I won't read you what she wrote in there, but we were kind of looking through it last night. And I think she was using this back in like 2017, 2016, something like that.
Yeah. I wrote that whole program when I was still a musician, the whole Uplevel Your Life program. That's what
Yeah.
started my company, because my company became Uplevel You. But that's so cool. I love that she did that. It's still
Well,
our top selling program.
yeah, yeah. So, and it wasn't a response to some snappy marketing. Well, your marketing is snappy actually, but not formulaic marketing is my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And it's about. I can't imagine that you would approach it any other way, because otherwise it would be very incongruent with what you're teaching us, right?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that if something is going to be sole sourced, if I'm going to be a sole sourced entrepreneur, I'm assuming that what that means is I have to show up in my work. I, capital I, have to show up in my work.
Yeah.
Not I as somebody who aspires to be like somebody else or pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah.
So if you weren't doing that in the way that you're showing up in the way you teach that to us, that'd be a problem.
Yeah, and marketing to me is actually communication. It's just communication done well. And some people use it in manipulative ways, but when it's done really well, it becomes an extension of you and a really deep connective way to communicate to your prospects and your clients, and people notice when you're doing something differently.
Yeah.
When you find that voice and when you find your message and you begin to put it into your writing, your articles and your emails and that kind of thing.
So I want to pick apart the title of your book for a second.
Okay.
You've got Soul Sourced Entrepreneur. So I want to take those piece by piece and then put them all
Okay.
together. First of all, what do you mean by soul?
God, that's a good question. I really struggled with using that because I didn't want people to think I had co-opted that word to mean anything in particular. And what I truly mean is the core, the essence of who you are, and coming from a deeper place than just ego. And that's really, it's no more expansive or complex than that, beyond just ego, left brain, here's what business has to be, a deeper place.
So more of an internal focused approach.
Is it internal? Well, if we are, okay, in anything we do, we are the common denominator. So what energy we bring to that is always going to be a part of it. And yet most of us avoid that. We avoid ourselves. We avoid our darkness. We avoid, we only want to be happy, happy, jolly, jolly. We don't want to talk about anything that's hurting. And so we distract, we avoid, we tune out. And whether that means soul, to come back to center, but it doesn't necessarily mean internal, like let's all stare inside and get all dark. It's really about being able to be present to that, being able to understand that the energy you bring to your work, to your business, whatever it is, really matters, and that it's worth spending some time mining for what's there as opposed to avoiding what's there. And that brings us to that next word, sourced.
Yeah, sourced. So as I'll use something that people are taught in facilitator school. Say more about that soul or the sourced piece.
Yeah. And I do that a lot. Like, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
So you're asking me to say more about that sourced piece?
I am.
So I've had encounters with a lot of different business strategists and coaches, and everybody is very, very data driven. I'm all for data. I'm all for facts. And there is some kind of weird X factor that most of the strategists can't explain when they look at my stuff, that doesn't necessarily align with all the perfect data, all the perfect left brain stuff when it comes to business. And that sourced part is, coming from the truth of who you are, marketing from, like you said, a real authentic place, making the choice to be super congruent because you're coming from a different place, as opposed to this subject line works, this heading works, this fake scarcity works, it'll get people. It's
Right.
a difference from getting people to I'm going to be who I am, and the ones who are the right ones are going to come. And it sounds to the left brain strategists very woo. I've been called woo. I've been, eye rolls, all that kind of stuff. And I live in Asheville. I am not even close to being woo compared to what's going on here, around me here. That's why I say strategy and soul are both important. But I think, as you said, love is just damn good business. When you are tuned into that, there is something, whether you call it love or you call it soul, that leads, that is sourced, that can make deeper, better, bigger decisions for you.
Yeah. So it's not just a question of recognizing that soul aspect of ourselves. It's using it in our business, which brings us to the word entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So this might sound like an odd question, but what do you mean by entrepreneur? Who is it that qualifies as an entrepreneur? And the reason I ask the question is it's one of the words, I think, one of those words that we use to describe a lot of different things. It's a pretty big umbrella, and I think there are a lot of different definitions for it. So how do you define it?
Yeah.
Not define it, but how would you describe it?
Yeah, I don't have I like to be really, really upfront. I don't have a neatly defined way of looking at it, but it is someone who is, for me, it's the spirit of the thing. It's someone who is stepping out of rules and creating their own. I sort of look at it as creating your own economy, meaning your world, your life is now, you are now responsible for all aspects of it, whether it's the people you hire, the people you relate to, the fact that you're paying yourself now, and you are every aspect that we consider our lives to be: spirituality, environment, economy, relationships, people working for you, service that you provide. Everything is in and from you. You are the core of this thing, this business you've created. And that entrepreneurial spirit, when someone really gets that, sort of like my disillusionment moment with music, it wasn't an overnight thing. It wasn't like it was a moment where I kind of started to realize, wow, I'm going to have to do something about this. But I stopped being in the world of being at effect and stepped into a world of being at cause. And the spirit of my music at that time, and then moved into a coaching business, started to come forth and realize this is bigger than just money. It is bigger than just business. It is bigger than just this tactical thing I might be doing right now. And that, to me, embodies all of what entrepreneurship is about.
I meet a lot of people. That's beautiful, by the way. But I meet a lot of people who describe themselves as entrepreneurs. This is the question, the thinking behind my question. And when I put them side by side, they're as much different as they are similar, maybe more different than they are similar. So, for example, I'll give you a few different areas on the spectrum, as it were. I'm an entrepreneur because I want to start my own business doing something. That's one classification. The other is I'm an entrepreneur because I pay myself, because I'm responsible for my own business, but it's just me. I'm a solopreneur, or there's a few of us. And then there's I'm an entrepreneur. I started a company. I have 600 employees, and we do $700-800 million in revenue a year. Right? That's also an entrepreneur. Now, the person who said, I want to start a business someday, is not necessarily thinking, I want to have hundreds or thousands of employees and do hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue every year. But they do there's a commonality there among those folks as well. And I think it is that kind of almost, I'm reluctant to use the word spiritual, but there is a spirit, the entrepreneurial spirit that exists in all of those different manifestations of what that could look like. Who do you tend to attract more in your business?
It depends. Sometimes I have gotten plenty of people who had that idea, and what comes to mind, because we were talking about corporate. I've had a bunch of people who were in corporate jobs who decided to go start their own business and just took off and have created empires. They didn't necessarily know they were going to create empires with teams. And one of my she was a client. She started with zero. She had just left corporate. She went to six figures in a year. After a few years of being my client, I turned her into a coach on our team. She was amazing. She's now, in Rwanda, helping people be entrepreneurs there. Like, she's just one of those, amazing people who discovered that there was an entrepreneurial spirit in there. But I also have people who come and they are burnt out by it all. And they thought they wanted to follow their dreams, and they realized it was harder than they thought, and they aren't running this thing well, and they don't know how to market, they don't know how to sell. It was, but they have this business and they need to systematize it. And so I work at that level as well. I don't worry as much about labels. In fact, titling a book is one of the hardest things. You have great titles, so maybe you don't struggle with that as much. But I don't like labeling, who gets to say they're an entrepreneur versus who doesn't get to say. That's kind of an Instagram argument that I'm not really interested in having with people. I know there's a lot of phonies in any industry out there. There's a lot of wannabes in any industry out there. And, someone says they're a musician, they've never played a gig. Okay, fine. They're still a musician if they're playing music. But I find that if I get too into the weeds with, who gets to say they're what, I lose all focus on what I'm really about.
Yeah, no, I hear you. The issue that I have sometimes with people who are self-described entrepreneurs, there's almost like a tribal element in some ways. In some of the conferences that I've gone to speak at, or just to kind of hang out in, just out of curiosity, that are geared towards entrepreneurs, oftentimes there's an attitude.
Yeah.
And the attitude is that either you're an entrepreneur or you're a slave. Either you're an entrepreneur or you're living your life, dancing to somebody else's music. So in other words, if you're working for somebody, you are less than. That's the attitude that I hear in a lot of entrepreneurs.
Interesting.
And my question to them is, okay, well, if you're the entrepreneur, if you're the entrepreneur, and you're going to build a company, are you telling me that you're going to build a company of slaves, people who work for you? You're going to tell me that you're going to build a company populated by, your employees are going to be less than. Is that what you're saying? Because that, in a lot of ways, when people feel the way that you did in the cubicle, when people feel the way that this other person you just told us about felt, sometimes it's because they're in the wrong place. And there's something else that they need to be out there doing and carving out for themselves. But oftentimes, it's a failure of leadership in that place that they feel they need to begin with.
I look back at that, and first off, I should never have been hired. Because if anyone had been smart enough to do my Colbys or my disc or anything like that, they should have run. They should have been like, security, we have a breach here when I came in for my interview. Swarm. And I think what you're pointing to, though, is kind of comes back around to how important it is to know yourself. Because we don't know, you don't know. At that time, I did not have the awareness of management principles and company principles to realize that office was run badly. My boss was not a good communicator. Nobody was seeing my strengths. I just got these 360s that were a disaster because, hello, I didn't know what I was doing. And yeah, I do believe that. And I think understanding who you are is a huge piece of it. And I also think that some people, they're never gonna make it in a job, period.
Yeah. There's no scenario that applies to everybody, but I live in kind of an odd world. I guess it's not so odd for people to do the kind of work that I do. I'm an entrepreneur. We have a small company, virtual team, certified facilitators. lots of different partnerships that we work with. But my clients are corporate clients for the most part. And so I'm doing work in companies in which I would not be suited to work. Mm-hmm. And so it gives me, and anybody else that does this kind of work that I do, I'll speak for myself though, it gives me a different kind of a perspective. It's that both worlds perspective. So I can see both sides of the coin. So back to you, when you said they shouldn't have hired you to begin with. They should have, escorted you from the building, pulled the fire alarms, and everybody, I'm not so sure that as a rule of thumb, I would agree with that. I think that if they were smart, they would have known who you are, and they would have found a way to use your natural creativity. After all, you did work for a PR firm and all of that. I mean, it just seems kind of, we tend to fall back on, some image of the quote unquote right kind of person to hire, instead of saying, I want to hire good people. I want to hire creative people. I want to hire people who have a natural love for being around other people and want to make a difference and want to have an impact. And then I'm going to figure out a way, I'm going to teach them what they need to know, and I'm going to figure out a way to use their strengths and their passion in the work that needs to be done here.
And as a company owner, I have done that with my team. So I have somebody who works for me now as my operations manager, and she started as an assistant. And I think she came from a very corporate world and landed here. And I think at first she thought I was a complete, batshit crazy. And I sent her through training. Like I sent her to Dan Sullivan's team tools. I sent her to Colby training. She started to learn things and realized, oh, well, my boss is this way because she's supposed to be this way. I have strengths too. And it has been a game changer. Yeah. Most of my employees I've had full-time employees, and after COVID, I went to more contractors than employees, but they've stayed with me 6 and 7 and 8 years. Amanda's been with me 8 years. And I think some of it is because I have taken so much time to recognize the value that they bring to the table, because without that, I would be lost.
Yeah. I get it. So back to this soul-sourced approach to business, because I hear that and I think, yes, soul-sourced entrepreneur, somebody who wants to start their own business, is in business for themselves for sure. It's applicable to anybody, whether they consider themselves an entrepreneur or not, because one would assume we all have a soul. And we don't pay attention to it in the way that we show up in whatever we do. One of the elements of the LEAP framework that we teach, the Radical LEAP framework, is energy. So it's love, energy, audacity, and proof. You talk about energy as well.
I do.
So say a little bit about what that means to you and how we should be paying attention to it.
So the book is set up in 4 different sections, and it's all based in an acronym. And that acronym is something, it's like sort of a mantra we say at Uplevel, which is my company, and it is I'm in. And I broke it down into these 4 sections. So I'm in is all about being fully present in whatever work or business you're doing. And the first I is initiate intention. And that is where we have to have that vision, where we have to have that idea, whatever it might be. And I walk through all of that. And unfortunately, in many of the mindset trainings or law of attraction things that we see out there, that's where people stop. And the second letter, which is M, is all about managing your power or managing your energy. I use those words interchangeably. And that's because once you've set an intention, my experience has been that intention is so powerful that it brings up anything unlike itself to be cleared. And most people stop at that point because it's so terrifying. They think, oh, look at me, I'm calling in all kinds of bad stuff. But the part about managing that energy and understanding your energy means that at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, when you were all gung-ho on New Year's Eve to set all those resolutions, you're now faced with choices and low energy and who are you? And what that whole section of the book is learning how to deal with the mindset of entrepreneurship, to deal with the fact that someone wants you to discount your price, or someone betrayed you as an employee, whatever it might be. How do you manage yourself in all of those situations? And so, yes, I speak to that as it's the daily working with your intention and living through all the myriad things that happen in a business.
So when I start out with an intention to create something, to accomplish something, to make an impact, to make a difference, the intention is kind of the easy part, is what I'm hearing you say, right?
Oh, yeah.
And when you say that's usually where it stops, it's because we don't like to do anything unless it's easy.
Well, it's like getting an idea to write a book is so much better than the actual writing of the book or whatever it might be.
Exactly. I mean, how many times do people come up to you at one of your retreats or one of your events and say, I want to write a book. I want to write a book. I've gotten to the point, you hear that a lot?
All the time.
Yeah. So I've gotten to the point where I will say to people, I hear what you're saying, but really what I think you're saying is, not I want to write a book. I want to have a book.
I want to have written a book.
I want to have a book. Yeah. I want to have written a book. And you can't, so I can start with the intent, but the intent to write a book is different from kind of a passive desire, right? Mm-hmm. So intent has energy in it. But then what I'm hearing you say is whenever you have an intent, that this is my interpretation of what you said. If I have an intent for something, to create something that by definition does not yet exist, then the natural response to that is what we typically interpret as negativity.
Yes.
It's the resistance, the doubt, and that is where it stops for a lot of people, right? It's the experience of it, but then the question is, what do we do with that? So it's not that, I think for some people, when they start to experience the negative voices or whatever, they think there's something wrong with them. Because if my intent was pure enough, it should be just flow out.
I should be floating by now, and the angel should have delivered it, or whatever your little bent is on this stuff.
So then when I find myself saying, I'm not worthy, then I find myself saying, well, I shouldn't be feeling that I'm not worthy. So what's wrong with me that I feel that I'm not worthy, which makes me even less worthy?
Yeah.
So what's one? Is there like a little nugget, a little something that we could use just on the onset of that sort of a thing?
Oh gosh, there are many, and I don't like to be sort of like a promoter of my book instead of giving the advice, but that whole section is written deeply, and it's written about that part of the process.
Right.
But I will say, one of the best places to start. So what you're describing is a moment where the dirt comes up. So you plant a seed, that's the intention. And the first thing that comes up is not the sprout, it's the dirt, right? And so the dirt comes up. And what you're talking about is in that moment, suddenly you have to react. Like it's like that painful thing. And I teach in the book, I teach two different ways of dealing with those things. One is that reactive, because it always happens. But the other one, which I think at first may be more important, is the proactive, the creative, meaning start creating a habit. So one of the habits that I teach in the book, which is a long time, and if your wife did Uplevel Your Life, I taught it in there too, but it's a Sunday Summit, which is a series of questions that, not a big series, it's just a little moment. It's like a come to Jesus moment, you and yourself every Sunday prior to the week, where you do a kind of a little coaching 360. And I'm not even going to I don't want to hide this from people. You can go grab it from my, at soulsourcedbook.com. You can go get all the tools from the book, and it's in there. It's nothing major. It's just something I started with Uplevel Your Life, and people loved it, and they started doing it every week. And what happens is, when you're proactive like that, when you create a habit like that, getting thrown off, all those little things that steal your attention and distract you and make you feel like you're worthless or whatever your patterns are, they don't take the wind out of you as quickly, because you've spent some time being proactive with that habit. And that would be where I would start anybody, is getting some kind of non-negotiable thing that you do every week where you check in. You check in on your intention or your word of the year, whatever your thing is. You look at the things you accomplished last week. You look at like, where did you get thrown off last week? And then you do a reset and you say, where am I at? And you kind of look at why did you get thrown off? Because a lot of times I'll have people say, I was going to write my book and I didn't write my book. And then I was going to write every week they come back and they realize maybe it's not time because I have so many other things and I have 3 little kids and I'm, running this and doing this project, and it's okay. But you can either at that point say, I'm going to take this off my priority list instead of beating myself up about it, or I'm going to delegate it or whatever it might be. But you start to recognize your own patterns and they start to not hurt so much or be this thing you judge yourself so much for, because you start to train yourself how to self-coach, which is so important in all of our lives. I don't care if you have a business or not, but it starts to realign and reset you each week.
Mm-hmm. So I'm in. So that's I am. What's the next I?
The next I is interpreting circumstance or interpreting experiences, whatever it might be. But so interpretation, like you just said, like, oh, that means I'm unworthy, or I got rejected and therefore it means God doesn't want me to have a business, or whatever you might do with it. So we tend to have a very, I call it the KonMari approach. I'm not sure if I said that right, but approach to organizing our situations that happen in our lives. There's good stuff and there's bad stuff. We have these 2 bins. I got the deal, good stuff. I didn't get the deal, bad stuff. Right. My boss loves me, good stuff. My boss hates me, bad stuff. And we are so busy black and whiting everything that we don't recognize how much of this can be reframed toward anchoring back to our intention and say, how might this be calling me to expand? How might this be my intention actually showing up? So you say, I want $1 million business, and then your team all quits the next week. Well, what if your intention was so powerful that you simply just released everyone who wasn't going to get you to that $1 million business? Is it a pain in the ass? Absolutely. But much better to reframe it and say, wow, look how powerful my intention was. So I try to anchor everything back to how clear you are in each and every day and how you interpret everything matters. And then the N in I'm in is navigating decisions, because that's what we're all doing all the time, is we're just constantly making decisions.
So, and that navigation is going to depend on your interpretation of the events.
Everything. So It's your intention feeds your attention and your energy, and then you're interpreting the experience, and then that does influence the decisions.
So is that it sounds like in the interpretation piece, there's a little bit of the philosophy that everything happens for a reason.
A little bit.
And that's a fascinating subject to me, because I don't want to debate the philosophy. I think that it kind of doesn't matter what the philosophy is. If I act that way, it's going to have an impact. So in other words, if I act as if all these people quit, and if I make the assumption that, that's a good thing, what can I learn from this that's going to serve me in achieving my goals, then there's no downside to that.
Yes. And I also want to point out that I don't think people make that shift instantly. Like, that's not the call. It's not like, oh, think happy, happy. There is, when you are hit with something, there is also an emotional process we have to go through. There is a pause button that does need to be set. Sure. So I want to clear that up so people don't
I get it. I think the everything happens for a reason kind of conversation that we have for ourselves is one of the things that we do to console ourselves when we're experiencing that negative, the natural, normal negative impact. I mean, there are very few people that are going to say, everybody quit. That's fantastic.
Awesome. I know. No.
I don't have to pay their. I don't have to make payroll this month. Yoo-hoo! And any normal person is going to feel all kinds of things, from betrayal to frustration to self-doubt, and then we step back and say, well, maybe there's a good reason for that. And if so, how can I navigate my next decision, my next steps?
The question I always ask first is, how might this be calling me to expand?
Yeah.
Meaning, not that it's easy, because it's not, but how might this be calling me to expand? And ultimately, nothing, like I think you're sort of saying, nothing has meaning. It really doesn't. Ultimately, we can look at it as a very deep existential question.
Yeah.
There isn't any meaning. But as an entrepreneur, as somebody who is leading, a leader, period, it does help you to bring a different light to things than just the usual American media driven drama story of these people suck, these people don't.
Right.
You suck, I don't. Whatever it might be. Yeah. But the divisiveness is just one of those things I don't anybody.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that nothing has meaning. What I'm saying is that even if that were true, we can act as if everything had meaning.
Yeah.
And there's no downside to it. I don't claim to be smart enough to know one way or the other. When I think everything happens for a reason, I do subscribe to that. I do for myself, and not that I could prove it, not that I would want to convince anybody else of it, but it serves me in the way that I work and show up in the world.
Yeah.
And it also implies everything happens for a good reason.
And it depends on what you consider good, and this is where it comes back to that word soul. I mean, we're here to do something, to expand into something, to grow in some way. If we were all just constantly getting our way, and there would be little growth. Like, just wow, it's like when you hear somebody describe their first time in the stock market and their stock explodes and they suddenly think they're a genius.
Yeah,
and then,
right.
And until they get slapped around a whole bunch and they realize they're not, and then they have to learn. There's so many stories like that. Just because you succeeded at one thing doesn't mean you're brilliant at that. And all the best entrepreneurs and business owners and the wisest people you speak to about anything, any area of expertise, is that they're all still learning, they're all still expanding, and two successes did not make them just suddenly say, I'm great at this.
Yeah. So the question of how is this what is it? How does this call me to
How might this be calling me to expand?
How might this be calling me to expand is a great question to ask in the face of success as well.
Yes.
Because what you just described is, it reminds me of this old quote. I don't know who originally said it, but my mentor Tom Peters used to quote it all the time. You should never rest on your laurels, because today's laurels are tomorrow's compost.
I love Tom Peters. I quote him in my book, by the way.
Oh yeah?
Because the soul track, as I tried to describe the soul track, I quoted him because he says, I said it's the soft stuff, the stuff no one wants to talk about. And I quote him as saying, soft is hard, because that soft stuff is what creates the hard numbers and the hard results. And I love him.
Yeah, he was on this very podcast a little while ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So that it's interesting because the word soul has lots of, for some people, baggage attached to it or connotations attached to it. And I remember one of his books back in the 90s was The Pursuit of Wow. And I was at the Tom Peters Company at the time, and we put together a workshop called Service with Soul. And I remember, trying to explain to potential clients exactly what the hell that meant.
My clients love it, and I get that in corporate, especially then, probably it was even a harder sell. I think it's probably a little easier now. But yeah, people resist anything that... This is why I don't like labeling stuff, and I don't like, who gets to say their what and who gets to say this, and it's just hard. It's one of those things that everybody has an association with a word that can be negative, and you just have to do your best with your context.
Yeah, well, Christine, you're talking to a guy who wrote a book called "Love Is Just Damn Good Business."
I love it.
And what I find is, and I'm curious if you're seeing the same thing with the reaction to soul. The assumption is, the general assumption is, that the business world will resist that.
Oh yeah.
That's the general assumption.
Yeah.
But that has not been my experience.
Well, because people come up to me after things. I did corporate trainings, and I also taught a monthly thing for government leaders every month in West Virginia for their leadership retreat space. And people would come up to me afterwards and whisper things like, I've always thought this. Like, it's like, why are we whispering? Like, why is this so dreaded? It's just so funny. But everyone has their thing. The right people will come up and tug at your sleeve and say, what you're saying means something to me.
Yes.
And thank you for saying it.
Exactly right. And so we've had almost identical experiences with that. And here's what that led me to conclude, if that's the right word, is that I'm really not in the business of convincing anybody of anything.
Exactly.
I'm not in the convincing business. I'm in the confirmation business. And I'm going to suggest that you are too. Because what's happening is when somebody tugs on your sleeve and whispers in your ear, you've confirmed for them what they already knew is true. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, they think there's something wrong with them. Mm-hmm. Because their whole environment, the whole corporate environment or wherever it might be, is implying that that's crazy. That's not. Yeah. There's no place for that in business. So where I've landed on this is my theory. I can't prove it, but most people, I'll talk in terms of love for a second. Most people already believe that love is good business. The problem is that most people don't believe that most people believe that love is good business. Mm-hmm. So they hide. And I think the same is true with this approach to soul. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, as this is an evergreen book. What you've written is an evergreen book. They're timeless principles. And over time, I predict that you're going to see more and more people in the corporate arena gravitate to that.
Yeah, I already get calls from them, and I already hear from people constantly about it. And I don't think it's long before more and more people are speaking at this level, and it comes out. And we're seeing more and more companies take this on and make this more important. But yeah, it does take a while.
There's definitely a trend in that direction. It's really funny because I remember, back in the 90s, back in the early days, when I was a younger man, and it was the millennials were coming into the workforce, and they were saying things like, we want to do work that's meaningful, and I don't want a job for life. I just want to do meaningful work while I'm here, and I want to have an impact on the world. And back then we were saying, these kids today, Yeah. And now we're still saying the same thing. And it's the difference, I think, is that little by little over time, there's less and less collective resistance to these kind of ideas, which is a sign of evolution, I suppose. One of the things that Tom said to me in our conversation was that because he has a new book that came out. The subtitle is Extreme Humanism. Mm. And the way he put it was, he said, this is my 19th book. He said, I've written the same book 19 times.
I actually like listening to his books. Little Big Things is one of my favorites. And I read that. We have our quarterly team meetings. I've read excerpts from that book so many times.
Yeah. It's wonderful because what the beautiful thing about writing a book, and this is why I always encourage those people, those aforementioned people that say, I want to write a book. I always encourage them to do it because there is an experience that you have when you write something that you're participating in an ongoing conversation in a way that people who don't write books are not. I mean, they're participating in it, by reading the books and having conversations about it, but by having the opportunity, and it's a great gift to be able to put words out there and ask people to respond to it. Yeah. And the words that we put out are built on everything that we've learned, right? I mean, we're all contributing to each other's work, and it's about jumping in on the conversation with people like Tom and so many others who've had such an influence on the way that we show up. So and like what we're doing here today.
Yes.
It's a great thing. Christine, this has really been a treat.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful to reconnect with you and to have you share your wisdom with all of us. So the best place for people to contact you and connect with you is where?
Oh, I'm all in the usual places, but my website is christinekane.com, and you can go look at more about the book at soulsourcedbook.com. And I have a podcast called Soul Sourced Business for anybody out there who's a business owner.
And your podcast, at least so far, is their what do we call them? Solo cast?
Yes,
is it?
It's right. I wanted to take the first year and sort of get my feet wet, because I was like, oh, if I have to start with interviewing people and becoming good at interviewing, that would be too stressful. So I just kind of turn on the mic and teach.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
Thank you.
I know I sound like a fanboy, but I guess I kind of am.
Well, back at you.
You know, I remember when we met, and I came home with a few of your CDs, and our girls were younger at the time. It was like, you know, they were a little starstruck, I think.
Oh, really? My nieces used to have posters of me on their wall next to like Britney Spears when they were young, and then after a while it was like, oh, hey. Then they turned like late teens, and then it was like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really been fun. I just want to say, on the record, it's been so much fun to watch your career and that really brilliant way that you've navigated into this world of helping people to become better at what they do. It's really been great to watch.
Thank you. Well, I'm really grateful to know you and to be a part of this and your work too.
Well, thank you, Christine. And to all of you listening, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, do what you love in the service of people who love what you do.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Love is Just Damn Good Business with Steve Farber. Join us again next time, because when customer and employee satisfaction just isn't enough anymore, we are here to back you up with specific ideas to operationalize love to make an enormous difference in your business, personal life, and the world around you. Visit our website at stevefarber.com to leave a review. And don't forget to share the love with your colleagues and friends, because after all, it's just damn good business.